Dark Side of the Ring this week covered the life and crimes of New Jack. At least this week's episode was about somebody who only attempted murder, which is an improvement from last week. New Jack was never one of my favorites. I never really got the appeal. I know he felt real. He wasn't somebody you wanted to, fuck around with, but I never got the appeal in the guy. I don't doubt that if I ever looked at him cross-eyed, he would kill me. Absolutely. I'm sure he's seen a lot of shit in his life, and he's somebody who you don't want to mess with. You don't want to get on the man's bad side. But some of the things that he has done, he should have gone to jail for. And he almost did. He caught a lucky break more than once in court and managed to get out of his predicament. But he should have been blackballed by every promoter for some of the things that he's done. And that really just speaks, I think, more so to the wrestling industry than anything else, the fact that he wasn't. Some of the shit that he did, he should have been blackballed for. Promoters should have turned their back on this fucking guy for some of the things that he did. But by all accounts, if he likes you, or if you don't do anything to fuck him over, you can get along with him just fine. And when you listen to him speak, the guy, he's smart as a tack. I think he's actually way more intelligent than people give him credit for. Or anybody outside of wrestling who would have watched this special and all they see is this guy who goes in there and just tries to kill people. He's a pretty intelligent guy. He knows what to do. He knows what to say to get a reaction. He does some of the more entertaining shoot interviews if you've ever seen clips from some of his shoots. But he's also batshit crazy. He had a child psychologist tell him. He didn't mention this in this special. But he had a child psychologist once tell him when he was 12 years old. He went to go see a child psychiatrist or a psychologist, and the psychologist told him that he was crazy. He was 12 years old. So last week's episode was disturbing. This was disturbing for very different reasons. Jim Cornette, D'Lo Brown, the Sandman, and Tiny the Terrible, they were the talking heads for this. Cornette booked New Jack in Smoky Mountain. D'Lo worked with him in Smoky Mountain and got to know him pretty well. Sandman obviously worked with him in ECW. I thought it was very appropriate that they filmed Sandman sitting at a bar somewhere with a beer in his hand. It seemed very appropriate. And Tiny the Terrible was friends with Eric Koulas, Mass Transit. He ended up being on bad terms with Mass Transit. Eventually, New Jack got him a gig working for WWE. Got him on TV once on Monday Night Raw. But he is no fan of the way that New Jack took advantage of people in the ring. He makes that very clear. He is no friend of New Jack's. He got the name New Jack from the movie New Jack City with Wesley Snipes that came out in 1991. And I think it had a whole bunch of people in that movie too. I couldn't believe it. I haven't heard New Jack City mentioned in so many years. And then I thought back and I said, you know what? I never saw the movie. I never saw New Jack City. And I was looking online to see if it was just kind of freely available, because sometimes people will upload these old movies to Dailymotion, or if you have Amazon Prime, sometimes you can get stuff for free, or it's on Netflix, and I can't find it anywhere. I guess at one time it was on Netflix, and now it isn't. So I want to see the movie. It's got Wesley Snipes, it's got Ice-T, it's got, I think, Judd Nelson and Mario Van Peebles, and all these different people. And it sounds like a pretty interesting concept, but that's where he got his name from. He just thought it sounded cool. And that movie came out in 91. It wasn't too long after that, a few years later maybe, that he made his wrestling debut. D'Lo thinks that a lot of his violence comes from his family life. And New Jack talked about growing up with a father that hated his wife, hated New Jack's mom. And his dad came home from work one day, stabbed New Jack's mom 5 times in front of the entire family. And she didn't die. She survived. But then later on, there was another incident where she was trying to leave. She was going to leave him. She was going to get the kids and leave. And the father shot her in the back of the leg to stop her from leaving. This is what this guy grew up around. And New Jack says, people wonder why I flip the fuck out so much. This is how I grew up as a child. He had a fucked up childhood. Clearly that had an effect on him. Jim Cornette said that not too much is known about New Jack from his early life. His understanding is that he supposedly was a bounty hunter and a previous life that had a few justifiable homicides to his name. That is the belief, that he worked as a bounty hunter when he was younger. And I believe, supposedly, he killed at least 2 people. I guess you would say in the line of duty. But nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows for sure. Cornette talked about running Smoky Mountain. They needed a heel that could be believable. They were showing footage of some of the very controversial at that time, and would be even more so today, promos that New Jack would cut on television. And he decided he was going to incorporate real-life situations into his promo work. So, they show the promo, one of the more infamous promos, where he was giving praise to O.J. Simpson. This was after he had committed the murders. And yes, O.J. did commit the murders. And Cornette, he was talking about how in Smoky Mountain, the audience, if you look out into the crowd, it was made up mostly of white redneck fans. So all New Jack had to do was go out there and just piss off all the white people. And they showed a promo from 1994 where New Jack gave a shout out to O.J. Simpson. He said, "Keep up the good work, because that's 2 less that we got to worry about. Keep up the good work." That was Jim Cornette's idea. There was a shoot interview a few years ago. Cornette was in the middle of his shoot. All of a sudden, there's a knock at the door. I think he was filming with Sean Oliver, and they opened the door, and there's New Jack and Mustafa. And Cornette had no idea they were there. You could tell he was a little nervous, because he and New Jack didn't exactly end things on the best of terms. He didn't know what was going to happen. It's kind of like this nervous laugh. But New Jack went over, he gave him a hug, he's singing "Why Can't We Be Friends?" He basically New Jack hijacked the Cornette shoot for about 15 minutes. But so as they're in the room together, he's talking about this. And he says, that was this guy's idea. That was this guy's idea. He says, one day Cornette comes over to New Jack. He tells New Jack, "Hey, go out and cut a promo." New Jack says, "Well, what do you want me to cut a promo about?" And he goes, "Just go say something to piss off white people. Go talk about OJ." So that was Jim Cornette's idea. And Jim Cornette, of course, just laughs nervously because, it's wrestling, right? It's wrestling. You're just trying to get heat. But, that was not actually New Jack's idea. That was Jim Cornette's idea. But he first got paired up with Mustafa in Smoky Mountain as the Gangstas. And Mustafa used to, one of the more very odd revelations in this special is that Mustafa would used to roll pencil shavings into blunts and smoke them. And I remember in the special Sandman, and imagine the shit Sandman's done. And he tried to have Sandman do it once, and even Sandman was like, no, thank you. I'm not doing that. New Jack is like, "You're crazy. What are you doing?" "Oh, no, it's good. Pencil shavings." He would roll up pencil shavings and smoke pencil shavings. D-Lo, he was the head of security for the Gangstas. As he explained, really, he was the bump guy, so New Jack and Mustafa would do their thing, and then at the end, D-Lo would come in. He'd be the one to get beat up and take all the bumps. And they got a ton of heat, because here you had this group of black guys in the Deep South saying the things that they were saying, getting under the fans' skin. At a time when it was still very much real to them. Wrestling was still a very real thing to a lot of the fans in that area, I'm sure, back then. So as you might expect, they took a lot of abuse. Verbal and otherwise. The N-word was thrown around like a baseball on opening day. New Jack himself, he used the N-word freely throughout this episode, and it was very amusing watching them bleep the F-word every time he would drop an F-bomb, but then they would leave the N-word uncensored. I mean, if you're going to let that word fly, then why even bother bleeping the F-word? I mean, what, are you worried about the FCC? The FCC's okay with one, but not the other? So the producer says to New Jack, he goes, "So was that, the most fun that you had? Or, was that a fun time for you working in Smoky Mountain and getting everybody all riled up and pissed off?" And New Jack said, "No, it wasn't fun. He was getting called the N-word all the time. D-Lo talked about it again. He said it was thrown around like the word hello. But it's a weird thing because they were the heels, and so they wanted that. He goes, it doesn't make any sense. It's like counterintuitive that you actually want the fans. If the fans are chanting racial shit at you, that means it's a good thing. That means you're doing your job. But on a personal level, imagine if you had to go to work every day, if you were D-Lo Brown or if you were New Jack, and as part of your job, you had to get people so angry at you that they would chant, or even if they weren't angry at you, and they're chanting the N-word at you every day. And this is life. This is what life is like for you every day. Yeah, I'll bet that wasn't a very fun time for him. Now, he didn't leave Smoky Mountain on the best of terms. Cornette accused him of leaving for ECW without giving his notice. Never forget that New Jack once worked a match with The Undertaker in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. It was a tag team match, but still. Never forget, Undertaker and New Jack once worked a match against each other, which is still something I just cannot wrap my head around. I didn't watch much Smoky Mountain up here in New York. There was a segment with the Gangstas and Jim Cornette once that I did see on YouTube. Cornette was trying to convince them, I think, to be their manager or something, and New Jack had this great line. I just thought it was so fantastic. He said, "I got a college education and a criminal record. I know how to make decisions." Just the way he said it. The way he delivered that line was fantastic. I have no idea if New Jack actually went to college, but whether he did or if he just made it up, I thought that was a great line. So then they get to the mass transit incident. You knew they were going to bring this up. You knew you can't tell the New Jack story without telling the story of the mass transit incident. Here's this kid who was 17 years old, but told everybody that he was 21. And he had showed up to this ECW show in Massachusetts. And he had a midget wrestler with him, which is where we meet Tiny the Terrible. He had Tiny the Terrible with him. Tiny the Terrible, by the way, lives in a shitty little apartment, and he put this VHS cassette in to show the producers. He's so proud of the time that he appeared on Jerry Springer. He goes, he loved it. He loved Jerry Springer. He says, "It's the reason I got most of the pussy that I got." So Tiny says that New Jack, he would, if guys either went, against the plan that they had put into place or didn't cooperate, he would go off on them. And he bashes him. He says, "You cut that kid up, man. This is this kid's first real match, his first big match. You cut that kid up." And he really took New Jack to task for what he did, taking advantage of this kid. Yes, the kid gave a false age, but he carved this guy up like a fucking Thanksgiving turkey. I was not aware that Mass Transit had already had a few matches. I thought he was just a fan, some kid off the street who conned them into thinking that he worked matches before. But he did. He worked with Tiny the Terrible, Tiny's brother, who was also a midget wrestler. They had a routine where they would, work together on the indies, and they probably took it around the horn. Paul Heyman saw a tape of them, and he invited them down for a tryout. Of course, when they got there, Tiny realized that he was kind of cut out of things, and Mass Transit went out there. I'm sure looking back on it now, he's probably grateful for that. Who knows what New Jack would have done to Tiny the Terrible. So they had a couple of ECW security guys they interviewed who worked the show that night. And they were saying, they had no idea who this Eric Koulas kid was, but he claimed he was part of the show. And they said he lied and said that he was 21. And Axel Rotten wasn't there. He had called in sick. He had a family emergency. As my phone goes off now.
Just a sec. Okay, I found this on the web for why didn't said that he was 21 Axelrod. Wasn't there he called in sick to work at a family emergency. Check it out.
Fuck. Siri says, "I found this on the web for why didn't said that he was 21 Axelrod. Wasn't there he called in sick to work at a family emergency." I think my phone just had a stroke. I think my phone just had an aneurysm. Poor Siri. Let's try that again, shall we? So Axel Rotten had called in, said he had a family emergency, and so Eric Koulas took his place. There was going to be a tag team match that night. It was going to be him teaming up with Devon Dudley against, I guess, the Gangstas, unless it was New Jack and somebody else. I don't remember offhand. And he told Paul Heyman what he was going to do. He told Paul Heyman what he, was going to do after Heyman said, "Look, you got X number of minutes, and you're going to, beat up the fat guy." And he told Heyman, he says, "What I'm going to do to this kid is going to get talked about for the next 10 years. And here we are now, 20 years later, still talking about it. So this poor kid is in this match against the Gangstas. And he had different, he wanted, I think, to get color. He wanted to get blood, which is a whole, why would you even tell New Jack that? Why would you even do that? But New Jack said, this whole situation, he found it very disrespectful because Eric Koulas had asked New Jack if he can get some offense in. He had ideas for spots in the match. He didn't know. He's a fucking 17-year-old kid. New Jack felt very disrespected. He said, I didn't want to kill him, but I wanted this kid close to death. Which is a very nice thing to say. So they showed the incident. They have the footage of what happened, and New Jack was in the back getting high all day. He told Devon, look, we're going to throw you out of the ring. You stay outside. So right away, Devon gets thrown out of the ring, and he's out of the picture. And this guy took, I think it was I don't know if it was an X-Acto knife or a surgeon's scalpel. It was some giant, blade. He took this thing, and he's trying to cut this guy open. He says at first there's no blood. So he digs in deeper into the kid's forehead, and all of a sudden he gives it like one big swipe, and blood is pouring out of this kid's head. I mean, blood is leaking. You can hear his father, who was there with him. The kid's father, was at ringside or off camera, yelling, cursing, saying, he's only 17, he's only a kid. And you watch the incident play out, and all the blood, and the way they're just beating the shit out of this kid. And New Jack, he's yelling, he's cutting a promo. He says, I hope this fat piece of shit bleeds to death because I don't give a fuck. And security said our only goal was to get this kid out of the ring. And it was scary. And they said, it was touch and go there for a while. I guess it killed all the nerves in his forehead. And he was permanently disfigured on the forehead, which, I mean, every wrestler who blades is permanently look at New Jack's forehead. Look at New Jack, look at Dusty Rhodes, Abdullah the Butcher. All these old wrestlers have butchered themselves. So it was very disturbing to watch. And you could say, well, New Jack was totally not at fault because this kid had no business lying. Absolutely. The kid is in the wrong for lying. He shouldn't have lied. And he ended up paying a very steep price for it. But that doesn't, look, even if you say he lied about his age, and maybe he asked somebody, can you, cut me or give me, color or whatever. New Jack didn't have to go as far as he did. But it's not entirely his fault. I won't put all the blame on New Jack for what happened because he's not totally at fault. The kid has to bear some responsibility in that as well. No doubt. No doubt about it. And Eric's father was freaking out in the back, and he was trying to get at New Jack, and supposedly he kept calling him the N-word and stuff, and he said he would have killed him if he could. If he could get to the father, he would have killed that old man. So they talked to Tiny the Terrible, and he almost got into a fight with Eric's dad because he refused to give him a ride back. So, he wasn't really on the best of terms either, but the kid got 50 stitches in his forehead. 50 stitches, and again, it killed a lot of the nerves, had a giant scar on his forehead, and the kid passed away a number of years ago. I think complications from gastric bypass surgery, I believe, is what they said. And he didn't seem too bothered by it when they brought that up. They asked New Jack, hey, what do you think? And he didn't really have a whole lot to say. But charges were pressed against him. He almost went to jail for what happened in that mass transit incident. And he was asked about taking a plea deal, and his attorney said, you know what, I think I can get you off for free. We don't even have to worry about a plea. I think I can get you off. And so you have this very disturbing incident. And there's a jury, a 6-person jury, 5 white women, and 1 older African-American guy who New Jack says in court kept dozing off. And New Jack, he was joking. He says, I needed him to stay awake. He kept looking at that one black guy in the jury as his big savior. He goes, stay awake. I need you. Tiny the Terrible, he was part of the trial. His job was basically to show that if Koulas could wrestle with him, then he was qualified enough to wrestle with New Jack. Now, he had told New Jack, he said, look, he would love to work in WWE. It's kind of like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of thing. And Jack said, look, I'll take care of it. He goes, if I get off here, I will take care of you. So Paul Heyman had to testify. They couldn't interview Paul Heyman for this for obvious reasons. So he had to testify during the trial. And he was asked about what Koulas's father had called New Jack. And Heyman said, well, he called him the N-word. And the lawyer said, well, for the record, I need you to say the word. And so Heyman just looked over at New Jack and he apologized. He said, "I'm sorry." And then he said the word. And New Jack said that when Heyman said the word in court, the black juror, all of a sudden, he kind of, him and all the women, everybody on the jury really perked up and it got their attention. And so New Jack was found innocent. He got off and he got Tiny the Terrible a gig in WWE. It might have only been a one-shot, but they have footage from the Monday Night Raw episode. There was a whole thing where they brought out the little people. I don't remember what the whole segment was. I think the McMahon-Helmsley faction was out there or something. It might have been just a one-week thing. But he said New Jack pulled it off. He doesn't know how he did it. He has no idea how he pulled it off, but he got him the gig in WWE. And they talked about all the crazy balcony dives that New Jack did in ECW, and he said he was snorting coke in the locker room basically every night, getting ready to do each dive, I guess to calm his nerves or something. And the higher he got, the higher the dives got. He'd be 10 feet up, 20 feet up, 30 feet up. And they did talk about the Vic Grimes one. I talked about this a few weeks ago. This is where the heat between him and Vic Grimes really began, because they were on a pay-per-view in either 99 or 2000. They were on an ECW pay-per-view. They were up. They were going to do a balcony dive. And Vic Grimes got cold feet. He goes, "I can't do it. I can't do it." And New Jack is like, "We'll go together." "No, I can't do it." New Jack says, "Motherfucker, you're going down." And he grabbed him, and off they went. And upon landing, and Vic Grimes is a big guy, well over 300 pounds. He landed right on top of New Jack's head. And it, I think, fractured New Jack's skull. It caused permanent damage. He's got blindness in one eye. He still gets daily headaches to this day. It really fucked him up. In his mind, just because he hesitated. They say he who hesitates. And in this case, New Jack paid the price for it, even though he's the one who grabbed the guy and pulled him off with him. But that's kind of where the heat started. So now you fast forward a year or two. I think it was XPW. It was a different promotion. And they're going to work together. It's a scaffold match. And there's just stacks of tables in the ring as high as the eye can see. New Jack had bought a stun gun earlier in the day. He was out for revenge. Sandman said, "Hey, what's going on here?" And New Jack says to him, "I'm going to tase this motherfucker." So Grimes comes over to him before the match. He apologizes, for what happened in the past. New Jack is pissed. He goes, this guy never called me one time to check up on me to see how I was doing. Never called me once. And again, he says he got high before the match. We see video from the match. They're up on the scaffold. He's using the taser. He's tasing the shit out of this guy. Grimes is trying to tell New Jack, "I can't feel my legs." He's tasing the shit out of him. "Can't feel my legs." New Jack says to him, You're not going to need them. Bombs away. And he tosses Vic Grimes off the scaffold. And off he goes. And everybody who comments, Cornette and everybody, D'Lo, they can't believe this guy survived the fall. They cannot believe that he missed hitting the floor by about a foot. Hitting the ring post, which is what New Jack was aiming for. New Jack was trying to kill this guy. He's talked about this incident before. He has flat out admitted he was trying to kill him. He was hoping that he would hit the post and either break his back or kill him. If anything, he says he didn't throw him hard enough. He wanted him to hit the floor. He wanted him to hit the whatever it was, wood floor, pavement, I don't know, maybe they were in a gymnasium somewhere. He wanted him to hit the floor. Sandman was amazed that this guy didn't die. Cornette says it's just fool's luck that he wasn't paralyzed. One of the scariest things that I've ever seen was Vic Grimes had an angel on his shoulder that day. The way he landed and bounced off the ropes, it kind of cushioned his fall. Amazingly, he only suffered a dislocated ankle. That was the only injury, aside from being stunned with a stun gun, which I'm sure didn't feel too good. He suffered a dislocated ankle. That was the worst of it. That was the worst of it. And I think New Jack, was it the Vic Grimes thing? I think he said to him after the fact, like, "Oh, now we're even," or something like that. But then they get into a whole other story. I didn't realize they were going to tell this story on the show. And I had heard about this story before, but it doesn't get talked about like the mass transit incident or even the Vic Grimes scaffold toss. They ever had an Olympic competition, scaffold tossing, New Jack would be the champion. He'd be gold medalist. But they ask him, hey, was there ever a time that you feel like you went too far? And New Jack brought up the Gypsy Joe incident from 2003. Gypsy Joe was very old at this point. He had been wrestling for years and years, decades. He was in his 70s. New Jack knew that he was in his 70s, but when the match started, he says he forgot. How you forget something like that? I guess if you're high on coke, you forget. But he forgot that the guy was so old. Joe had this reputation for being, this tough guy. He doesn't feel pain. He's impervious to pain. And he had talked to New Jack before the match, and he basically said to New Jack, hey, just follow me. And apparently that was a big mistake. For him to say that to New Jack was a very big mistake. So they get into this match, and they have footage, of the match. It's on video. And part of Gypsy Joe's gimmick is he doesn't sell moves. He doesn't sell. Well, that don't work for New Jack. He starts beating the crap out of this guy. You've got people in the audience screaming racial shit, screaming the N-word at New Jack, which is just making him even angrier. He grabbed a barbed wire baseball bat, and he beat the fuck out of this guy with this bat. He was hitting him in the head with this bat, full force. He wasn't pulling it's like, pulling punches and stuff. He wasn't holding back at all. This guy's 73 years old. I don't care if the guy's an asshole. I don't care if the guy's not selling your moves. You don't take a fucking baseball bat full force to this guy's skull. You don't do that. There's no justification. Everybody will laugh and say, well, that's just New Jack being New Jack. He was disrespected. So it's okay then if someone disrespects you to take a baseball bat to their head if they're 73 years old, really? What a great human being you must be. This is the kind of shit I'm talking about. A lot of the New Jack stuff, you can laugh, it's funny, haha, but then there's shit like this that just makes your stomach turn. Now, just to give you some more, kind of background on the whole Gypsy Joe incident. It was an NWA show. It was in April of 2003. And, again, Gypsy Joe had this reputation for, sometimes he himself would take liberties with some of the people he would step into the ring with. Supposedly, he did that with Taz. Taz's first match in Tennessee, I believe, was against Gypsy Joe, and Gypsy Joe may have taken some liberties with a young Taz. So the promoter had gone to New Jack and said, you do a non-finish with Joe. Jack refused, and he said, if I let this guy beat me or if we went to a no contest or something, it would kill my credibility because this guy is old as dirt. And I think what happened is, as the story goes, Joe got wind of that. He wasn't very happy about that. And, it just kind of went from there. They were not on the best of terms even going into the match. But there was a great write-up on Gypsy Joe in The Observer after he passed away in 2016. And there's one incident in particular, and I just wanted to just recap this one story, just because I thought, for people who aren't aware of Gypsy Joe, have never heard of Gypsy Joe before, I thought this was kind of a colorful little story. So he would have been about 60 years old at the time that this happened. He was sitting at home one day on a Sunday, and a neighbor of his came over to his house and said, hey, you want to go fishing? And he said no, he wanted to stay home. Gypsy Joe wanted to stay home and just watch the baseball game on television. The guy insisted. He kept pushing him and pushing him and pushing him. Come on. So Joe said fine. He was going to go fishing. Instead of going fishing, they end up at a local bar. Joe had no interest in being at the bar, but the guy said, we're just going to stop here and we're going to get some sandwiches. We'll sandwiches for the road. So they go in and Joe sits down at a table. There's a female bartender. She comes over. She recognizes Gypsy Joe. She's talking to him about old wrestling and, she's having a whole conversation with him. And she's like, well, what are you doing here? And he's like, well, my friend, if he doesn't hurry up, I'm just going to leave because I don't want to miss the baseball game. So his friend is trying to talk to this woman the entire time. All she wants to do is ask Gypsy Joe about old school wrestling. So the friend gets angry. He gets angry at Gypsy Joe. And he goes outside. He comes back into the bar. And he's got a gun. And he starts yelling at Joe about, you're trying to steal my girl from me. And he shoots him. He shoots Gypsy Joe. Now, I don't know where he shot him. If he shot him in the arm, in the leg. I'm sure he didn't shoot him in the head or the chest. But he shoots Gypsy Joe. Now, remember, Joe's whole gimmick is that he sells no pain, right? He's impervious to pain. That's his wrestling gimmick. And even though he got shot, he goes and he beats the fuck out of this guy. So the people at the bar, they jump in, they call the police, the cops come. They were insisting, you got to go to the hospital, you got to go to the hospital. Joe tells the doctor, just stitch me up because I got to go home and watch the baseball game. And they said, look, there's no way we can release you. You're bleeding internally. There's no way we can let you go. So I think he ended up in the hospital for a few days. The neighbor got arrested. The neighbor went to prison for shooting him. And I think in the story it said he ended up dying in prison. And the whole thing was, he wanted to go out with the woman, with the waitress at the bar. Found out she was a big wrestling fan. And the neighbor thought, well, if I bring in Gypsy Joe, that'll be brownie points for me. So the guy knew that she was a wrestling fan. He knew what he was doing. That's why he brought the guy to the bar in the first place. It's not his fault the woman didn't want to talk to him. But when he saw Joe hitting on her, he went crazy. He lost his mind. And so Joe is asked sometime after this incident. He gets asked, he goes, is that true? Is that true that, he said, no, I wasn't hitting on her at all. He said, no, she was fat and ugly. I just wanted to go home and watch baseball. And then apparently he was wrestling within a few weeks of being released from the hospital. Again, I don't know where he got shot, but I remember reading that story and thinking, there's no way that could possibly be true. And I still wonder, if there are elements of that story that aren't true, but apparently it was. Apparently, I guess it was documented in the news, and the guy went to jail and everything. So that I thought was kind of a cool story that gives you a sense of who Gypsy Joe was. The guy that New Jack decided to rough up with a baseball bat to the head. And that was not the last incident that New Jack would be part of. That was not the last incident that he would be part of. Cornette said, WWE, they were never going to touch New Jack. That's why we never saw New Jack in WWE. I do recall there being rumors around the time that they did the angle on SmackDown where John Cena was stabbed. He was feuding with Carlito at the time. Remember, he was stabbed at a club or something. And they did the big reveal. It was Jesus. It was Aaron Aguila, I think, was the one who portrayed Jesus. So he was Carlito's bodyguard. There were like rumors online that maybe New Jack was going to be brought in to be the guy to, feud with Cena. He's the one who stabbed Cena. I don't know if that's true. I never saw that reported by anybody I would consider to be credible or anything. But WWE did bring in New Jack for a tryout in 2005, which is hard to believe. But I believe that is true. I believe they brought him in for a tryout in 2005. I think he wrestled Val Venus in a dark match. It might have been empty arena before the crowd even came in. Apparently he looked terrible. The match was shit, so they passed on him. But imagine WWE giving New Jack a tryout just 3 years before they went PG. That would not have worked out well for them. So they got into a whole other incident with New Jack in Florida. There was a promoter down there who, he said that, New Jack was living with him for a while, and New Jack is a comedian. He's also a great cook. And they say, and they're like, well, what is this great dish that New Jack can cook? Spaghetti. It sounds like me. I could put pasta in a pot and boil it. That's my wonderful contribution to the culinary world. Apparently, New Jack cooks some mean spaghetti. But he got booked in the promotion down there against a wrestler named Hunter Red. And Hunter Red wanted to work with New Jack. He wanted to have a match with New Jack. Promoter said, it's a whole new ball of wax if you want to work with New Jack. I don't know if you know what you're getting yourself into here. So he goes over to New Jack backstage, I guess, at this particular indie event for which, again, they have footage that they aired here on the app. I like the fact they have footage of all these things. They're not just telling you, they're showing you exactly what happened. And I guess Hunter Red went over to New Jack before, hey, so what are we doing? And New Jack said, well, we'll talk about it, after. And apparently Hunter Red got very pissed off. He got very aggravated. He stormed off. And New Jack admitted that, he was also snorting coke. He was drinking vodka. So basically his usual pre-match routine. Some people stretch. Other people snort coke and drink vodka. That was the way that New Jack prepared for his matches. They get in the ring and Hunter Red starts stiffing him. He is stiffing New Jack in the corner, and he's hitting him in the nose. And you could just see this is not going to end well for Hunter Red. Apparently, New Jack had like a Wolverine claw in his pocket. Does he just walk around every day with a fucking Wolverine claw? I guess so. He pulls out this Wolverine claw. He's breaking the blades off. And he starts stabbing Hunter Red with the claw, with the blades. And they show D'Lo watching this on a laptop. He's mortified by what he's seeing. Cornette's watching this. And he's going, oh man, he's stabbing that guy. He goes, this doesn't do the image of pro wrestling any good. No shit. I think that's New Jack's whole career summed up in a nutshell. Does not do the image of pro wrestling very good. He stabbed this guy 9 times. He said it wasn't 16 times like the news said. Just for the record, New Jack wanted to make sure everybody knows it wasn't 16. It was 9. I stabbed the guy 9 times, and I know that. You know how I know that? Because I counted. This fucking guy's unbelievable. So the police get called, and they're told there's this black guy in camouflage who's stabbing a white guy, and the police come, they arrest New Jack, and he goes to jail. He's facing 15 years. He's facing 15 years behind bars. He got off of the mass transit incident, but now he's facing 15 years in jail. Hunter Red visits him in the Slammer. He says, look, I'll drop the charges. If you agree to go on the road with me, we'll turn this into an angle and we can make a whole bunch of money. And New Jack probably sees this guy, what a fucking idiot. He goes, yeah, if you drop the charges, we can do that. And then, of course, Hunter Red dropped the charges. New Jack got off. And then he hasn't talked to him since. New Jack was not going to work with this guy. So, producer at the very end, he goes to New Jack, if they ever made a movie based on your life, how would it end? What would the ending of a New Jack movie look like? And he starts cackling. He starts laughing uncontrollably, laughing his ass off. And he says, it would be me sitting in a wheelchair, snorting coke, getting high as shit, flipping everybody off saying, thank you, bitches. And I love that they have the reenactment in the background. They do these little reenactments on the show. And you see a guy sitting in a wheelchair, snorting coke, putting his middle fingers up, saying, thank you, bitches. And that's how the episode ends. It was every bit as crazy as you would have expected an episode on New Jack to be. I can appreciate the fact that New Jack, like I said, I think he's actually a lot smarter than people give him credit for. But some of the shit that he did, he should have been blackballed from the wrestling business. This goes beyond, well, he's real. We need more real people like that in wrestling. There's a fine line between, being a guy that people respect and standing up for yourself and maybe stiffing somebody if they piss you off, and just trying to carve him up like a turkey and trying to kill him because they did something that made you upset. Or hitting a 73-year-old guy repeatedly in the head with a barbed wire baseball bat. That shit don't fly. To me, there's no glorifying that. The fact that kind of shit is celebrated is sickening. So I think he should have been blackballed a long time ago. But I can appreciate the fact that the guy was an incredible promo. He probably wasn't much of a wrestler, but he never really was looked at as being some kind of great mat technician. That wasn't his gimmick. His gimmick was that he would go in there and beat the hell out of you. He was a brawler. He would use weapons. He would cut you up. I mean, that's who New Jack was. Great promo. Great promo, and not somebody that I would want to mess with. But the stuff that he got away with, he's very lucky he got away with some of the shit that he pulled. Now, Kevin Sullivan is going to be appearing on the Jim Cornette Experience this Friday, April 10th. He's going to be giving his side of the story, the allegations levied against him in the Benoit special that he abused Nancy. So he's going to respond on Cornette's podcast. Here's the remaining schedule. We have all the dates now for all the remaining episodes. This Wednesday, it's the Brawl for All that WWE did. They're going to be talking to Jim Cornette, Jim Ross, Vince Russo, Bart Gunn. They're all interviewed for that episode. Godfather. On April 14th, it is Jimmy Snuka and the Death of Nancy Argentino, which is one of the ones I'm looking forward to. The one I'm looking forward to the most, the one I'm most intrigued by, is April 21st, Dino Bravo. The Death of Dino Bravo. April 28th, Dr. D. David Schultz. May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, Herb Abrams in the UWF. That's going to be a wild one, too. You talk about cocaine and women and all kinds of crazy shit. You're going to get that in the Herb Abrams episode. May 12 is an episode on the Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal, and the finale, which I expected it to be. The season finale, May 19th, which is only days before the anniversary of his death, so I guess it's kind of appropriate, is the episode on the life and death of Owen Hart.